Warning, the podcast you're about to listen to may contain graphic descriptions of violent assaults, murder, and adult language. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to the Murder Police Podcast, The Murder of Clay Nelson, Part 1 of 2. Hello, listeners. I am Wendy.
And I'm David.
And we are the Murder Police Podcast. David, why don't you tell us what we have in store with the murder of Clay Nelson?
The listeners are going to get 2 episodes on the murder of Clay Nelson, who is a man that was killed in 1986 in Lexington, Kentucky. He was originally from Richmond, Kentucky. This is a very interesting case, and I know we say that all the time, but I'm not even going into some of the details because this is really going to shock people at some of the details in this. The unique thing about this one is that we once again have Fran Root back, retired Assistant Chief Fran Root, who was the lead investigator in this case. And if anybody's listened before, they know what Fran brings to the table and how enjoyable it is. The special treat on this one that I really was looking forward to for some time, and we finally made it happen, is we have 2 guests that are going to assist with the interview. It is Jonathan and Erica with the Lexington podcast. And I believe people who have listened before know that I've actually recommended that one. And that's actually, if I can count on my hand how many podcasts I have that I actually wait for episodes to come out, the Lexington podcast is one of them. We worked with them to get them in here to the interview room and to the Murder Police podcast studio to actually assist with this. They had actually ran a really good series on a thing called the Bluegrass Conspiracy. If you're not from Lexington, Kentucky, and that sounds unfamiliar, then go look up the Lexington podcast and play their series on the Bluegrass Conspiracy, and you'll get caught up on it pretty quickly. I had found them about the same time they found us. They were actually producing a series on the murder of Michael Turpin, which incidentally Fran Root had covered. And about the same time we found each other on the internet and reached out and made a contact and started talking about doing this episode today. So what we're going to have today is a case that involves a lot of things that make an investigation pretty challenging. When you have a fire, you have evidence that's potentially destroyed or at least confusing to work with. And Fran will tell you pretty plainly that he doesn't like arson cases. It's also a case that had a unique opportunity for a lot of things to fall into place almost simultaneously. The most evidence I've seen in a case in a long time. The most things that we arguably would call a break in a case. So with that, what we're going to do is going to dig in and take a listen to this one, and you have to listen all the way through the end of this episode and then catch number 2 because you're going to be amazed at the detail.
I agree. This is a really interesting case, and the evidence in it is just mind-boggling, and I think the listeners will find criminals truly are stupid. So with that, let's begin episode 1. Thank you for joining us today on Murder Police Podcast. With us today is former Assistant Chief Fran Root. Fran, how are you today?
Doing great. I've had both my shots.
Awesome. Glad to hear that. We also have 2 very special guests with us today. Lexington Podcast, comprised of Erica and Jonathan. Erica, how are you? And thank you for coming.
Oh, doing well. Thank you so much for having us. We are the biggest fans of the Murder Police podcast, and it's like a dream come true being here.
Jonathan, how about you?
She summed it up perfectly. I'm so excited to be here and have the pleasure to meet all 3 of you. Truly.
We've really been looking forward to this for weeks. So
well, we're happy that you all are with us, and we're so happy to have heard that you gave us such a wonderful shout out on your podcast, and we were listening to it coming back from Somerset over the weekend, and we loved listening to your case as well. So we're happy to have you all with us.
Can you tell us about your podcast and let the listeners know what you have to offer? Because I'm going to recommend it personally very strongly, and it'll be in the show notes. But tell us what you're about so they get an idea to go listen to you.
So we are the Lexington Podcast. We're a brother-sister duo. I'm the smart one, and Jonathan's the musician. And we are all things Lexington, Kentucky.
It's true. She does all the research, and then I come in as the person that would ask all the lay questions. And that actually really helps listeners to be like, that's what I would have asked, because I know nothing about police work. I know nothing about true crime, things of that nature.
We dabble in history, true crime, current events, local recommendations, and anything else that interests us about our adopted hometown of Lexington, Kentucky. We're a relatively young podcast. We've been producing shows very sporadically because we both have full-time jobs and family. But we've been producing episodes for about a year now, and we love it. It's turned into quite a fun hobby, I think, for both of us.
The more things we find in Lexington, the more we realize it's got such a rich kind of true crime culture in a way. Yeah. Not only is there many cases to fascinate you, but people love it.
Yeah, we actually found your podcast through the research of our latest true crime case in our current season 2. We're currently covering the tragic 1986 homicide of Michael Turpin. And when I was researching the case, I thought, man, I would really love to interview this detective, Fran Root, who was the lead detective on the case at that time. And lo and behold, actually, the week that I'm researching Fran Root, this far superior podcast pops up called the Murder Police Podcast, who had actually produced and published an episode interviewing Fran Root about the Mike Turpin homicide. So the timing was just perfect and so informative and helpful with putting our research together. And it's also made us like super fans of the show. So we're just like super excited to be here.
Well, thanks a bunch, because I think I found you at the same time you found us.
Yeah.
And I stumbled across it. And I'm just going to tell you, you knocked it out of the park. And I'm not just saying it as I contacted Fran and let him know that he had to hear that too, because the research on it and everything is incredible. So you did great with it.
Thank you so much.
What I really like is the way most of the time you all will do the crime and then you'll do interesting, light-hearted things or to get takeout during COVID and stuff. And that really makes, kind of let you come down.
End without homicide.
Yeah, that's right. Without blood on your hands.
Right.
Well, we're glad that you got to meet Fran. Fran is a popular guy. He's not going to toot his own horn. Fran doesn't do that. But from reading, when I read the book on the murder of Michael Turpin, and I had just met Fran a handful of times when I read it. And so then meeting him after and sitting down talking to him, well, Fran, you're kind of a superstar. We're just
that was back when I had hair.
You had those long black flowing locks.
70s mustache, let's not forget.
Yeah. I got rid of that pretty quick, though.
Came to his senses.
How did you all get an interest to get started doing the Lexington podcast?
We were talking one day over the Herald Leader. I had said, look at this crazy case. And it was something in connection to the Bluegrass conspiracy. And Jonathan said, well, I've read the book. You have to read the book. And so I read the book. And then we had just decided, this is really interesting stuff. Let's dive further into it and make our conversations about it public, basically. So it was a podcast that sprung out of a mutual appreciation of true crime, Lexington especially, and just the fascination with the Bluegrass conspiracy. And then we realized once we started to scratch the surface of Lexington, how multifaceted, like Jonathan had said, there's so much out there that would make really great podcast episodes and seasons. So
it's a neat city. I know I've loved working in it for almost 30 years. It's got a lot of people, but it feels like a small town. And there's always a quick connection to people. And keep scratching. We'll give you a hand from time to time because there's a lot of things that go on in a town just like anywhere else that you just don't know of unless you sit at a grand jury or go to trial every now and then. So excellent work. And you really did good with the Bluegrass conspiracy. I was excited because of my experience around it. It's always neat to hear that story again. So.
Definitely.
Well, what we are covering today, and Fran, we're so grateful to have you here with us because this was your case, was the June 28, 1986 murder of Clay Nelson at the Columbia Steakhouse, which at the time was on Alexandria Drive.
Correct.
So why don't you tell us when this call got dispatched to you? Start from the beginning and just tell us what was happening.
Okay. Well, it was in the wee hours of the morning. At least they let me sleep past 3 o'clock. If I can sleep past 3 in the morning, then I'm good to go.
You're good for another 24-hour shift, aren't you?
It's that 1:30 to 3 area that you just never shake the cobwebs out and be able to function very well. So they gave me until 4:25 in the morning when they called me at home and told me that they had an arson and a murder. And so I was starting my way over that way. This was a Friday night, Saturday morning in the summer, and it lived true to form. It was just still, even at 4:00 when I first turned the radio on, it's hopping. They're dispatching calls left and right and holding other calls because they just can't get to them. So it's one of those Friday nights that I always enjoyed working because it just flew by and you'd be done pretty quick. So while I'm on my way, I'm getting radio traffic from the commanders on the scene and gradually building up to what I start knowing about it. And what I learned was that at about 3:23 that morning, they had a panic button alarm at the Columbias on Alexandria. And if you understand what a panic button is, it is one where you set off the alarm intentionally by pushing a button that tells the police that there is somebody there, a victim probably, hitting that kind of alarm. So you go from just that it might be a break-in with no victims there to thinking, well, this may really be something and somebody might be in some real danger. So units get there pretty quickly. It's dispatched within 2 minutes, and they start arriving at about 3:29. So another, 6 minutes it took to get several units on the scene. I think one of the first people there was the alarm company. I think it was Sonatrol at the time. Officer Ellen Zam, always the perennial midnight shift worker, and they got there, looked into the back door, and of course they had a lot of smoke and flame coming out, and right inside the back door they could see that they had a victim laying there, multiple stab wounds and a lot of blood, and so they dragged him out just to make sure that he wasn't still alive, and he wasn't. So they get him out to the back. Meantime, about the third officer getting to the scene sees this old blue Chevrolet racing out of the driveway with his lights off. That's a clue in our business that there may be something wrong. Officer Ron Davidson is the one that picked up on this, and the pursuit is on. One of the interesting things about this case is that it covers relatively a very small area, and you kind of get to different locations and you come back to them. So it's kind of unusual to have those kind of things happen. So anyway, we've got a high-speed pursuit going, probably not much more than 90 miles an hour, going down Alexandria, heading toward the Kroger that was there. Garden Springs, I think, was around there. And the car actually crossed the road, driving down the wrong side of the road, actually drove up into people's lawns, and then corrected, went back down and got on the right side of the road and quickly ducked in behind Kroger's, where it ran through a fence and crashed into some barriers. There was some construction going on at that time at James Lane Allen School. So the car was disabled and stuck against this barricade. Ron couldn't get that far down there without crashing himself. And so he sees two suspects jump out of the car and start running.
Let me take you back. You said that there was an active fire when it got dispatched.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever determine if that was an intentionally set fire?
Yes, they did. Yeah. They found the point of origin.
What's the purpose on that? Because we've seen those before, but what's the whole mindset of somebody when they light something on fire? What's their objective?
They know that I hate working them.
That's what I was going to.
It was all about me at that time, but no, it destroys evidence. It makes covering a crime scene very, very difficult. If it wasn't a mess when it was on fire, it's going to be a mess when the firemen get there. And you're wading through ankle-deep water everywhere, and the ceiling is crumbling down on you, and everything's just black and shades of gray, and very, very difficult to deal with.
So in a matter of 10 minutes, an alarm is intentionally going off.
Mm-hmm.
There's a fire that's set. Police arrive on scene. A Chevrolet leaves, and there's a high-speed chase all within 10 minutes of arriving on scene and then following them down.
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, this
Made for TV.
Yeah.
Well, normally we gripe about TV, say, how do they solve these things in 1 hour? Well, this was just about one of those that could be condensed down to an hour. I like to talk about cases. Michael Turpin, I would classify as a marathon.
Yeah.
We went, it was a 90-plus hour work week and went from a Monday morning to a Saturday night, just about nonstop. And I call this case a sprint.
Yeah.
And most other cases are kind of in between. But this one was a sprint. It was a done deal within the 24 hours. Matter of fact, within less than that.
This wasn't too long after Michael Turpin.
No, it wasn't.
Yeah, because Turpin was February of 86, and this is June of 86.
1986 was
Big old year.
a very bad year, yes.
Stay on the arson for a minute. Back then, did you have arson investigators?
No, we did not. We relied on the fire department to do those, and they were still in their infancy of really developing criminal investigators, making them out of firemen. It wasn't until maybe another decade that started really progressing, and now they've got an excellent program.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wanted to hit that because I know when I was up there, we did have them. I remember I worked with like Gary Ward, and I've got a case in the closet back there that he helped with. And the special expertise it takes for that was incredible. Just to watch them, I learned a lot walking through a house or a building with them and whatnot. So I was just curious as to how y'all made that determination and what, but without interrupting you, keep going.
Oh, we definitely stuck with letting the firemen do their job, and we did everything else. Speaking of firemen doing their job, as I got to the scene, Mike Malone was pulling up, and he's getting into his turnout gear and everything. Said, put that stuff back in your trunk. You're going to be a first assistant Commonwealth attorney today. You're not going to go play with the fire. And so he did. He put everything back into the car and got into the car with me. Meantime, we're learning a lot of different things. It was 3:32 when the crash occurred, and the suspect started running. By 3:44, we got canine units on scene. Canine units are fantastic. They do a great job most of the time. The first ones did not. The dog just wasn't working that night, and normally he was a good dog. Steve Stanley's, I believe, was the first one. He couldn't get going. Well, Kevin Sutton arrived on the scene with his dog and immediately gets a track going at a full run. So they're tracking there. Meanwhile, at 3:52, just another 8 or 9 minutes later, Clarence Jones calls in from 1620 Alexandria, claiming that his 1973 blue Chevy was stolen. Well, as you start looking at this thing, remember where I talked about the car went off the road and actually through people's yards? Well, guess whose yard it went through? And I'll get back to that here in just a little bit. Please remind me if I don't. We immediately divert to the 1670 Alexandria Drive where we meet Clarence Jones, learning that he was actually an employee that had worked that night much earlier of that Columbia's, and his roommate, Eric Hayden. Both of them were in sync, claiming that their car was up there at Columbia's in the back lot and somebody took off with it and stole it. So we're, of course, very concerned about their stolen car, and we certainly tell them that we want to do everything we can to get this. I've got a little bit ahead of myself on this, and that the remarkable thing about that call coming out, remember, this is still a Friday night, Saturday morning in the middle of the summer, And the dispatchers dispatched this stolen car because they had already put it together that this had to have something to do with the crime that we're working. Otherwise, they would have held that call for a couple hours.
Mm-hmm. So it wasn't important?
Yes, it was important. So this starts to show us homicide detectives like to claim that we're all that. But this is certainly a case where it's clear that everybody is doing their job and are working together, and things really fall into place because they're all working as a team and nobody's worried about getting the credit. You're just going to do what you need to do when you need to do it.
You know what's neat when we're recording this is we're wrapping up Telecommunicator Week. So
really?
You just high-fived them.
I missed that.
Yeah, so that's actually pretty good. I know we kind of stay out of the temporal time zone on these, but just for the record is that this is the Appreciation Week for those people that do that. So pretty cool.
Yeah.
Nice
tribute.
Okay, we go to 1670 Alexandria Drive. Myself, the first assistant Commonwealth attorney, Mike Malone, and by that time I had already learned enough to call the rest of the robbery homicide squad out so I could start divvying up some of the jobs. So we all kind of met in the front yard of 1670 Alexandria. It's the biggest stolen car response that I think Lexington had ever seen. And so we're highly concerned about finding these poor innocent people's car and getting it back to them. So, of course, one of the first things I do is I say, well, we're going to need to get a formal statement from you all. And, we'll run down to headquarters and get that done. We'll let you go as quick as we can. Another very valuable thing that happened by them calling in to report their car stolen is, guess what we got to do? We go up to their door, we knock on it, and they let us in. And we get to look around all we want to look around. And we're seeing blood spots in different places, and just enough to really have us, the suspicion is raised that much more. Not that you needed much more than that, but that starts adding to it. So now we've got probable cause for search warrants. And just to be safe, we went on and did one for the car as well, even though it was abandoned. We did one for their apartment and then one for the Columbia's restaurant. Have I mentioned yet that I hate arson scenes? I do. It's nasty. I stole a pair of fireman's boots some 6 months before that and always had them in my trunk so I could at least put them on. So when you step on the nails that are around your crime scene, it doesn't go through and get your feet.
Wow.
Interesting night. Meanwhile, back at the stolen car, canine Kevin Sutton is hot on a trail, and got to appreciate, and I wish I could do a visual for you just over how small an area this is, but less than 3/4 of a mile from the Columbia Steakhouse to the rear of James Lane Allen School, Kroger, there on Alexandria. Never was on another street other than Alexandria. So they are crisscrossing the dog and the canine officer along with the second canine officer, and they're damn near at a run. The dog stops at a large, we used to call them Herbie to Kirby's, wheeled trash cans, and hits on the trash cans, and they take a look down in there, and lo and behold, here's a money bag from Columbia Steakhouse. There's blood down in there and some other items. But anyway, the dog's still ready to go, and this is quick. The dog is ripping around in behind some other houses across the street from where Jones and Hayden lived. And the next thing I know, I'm looking up and we've got 3 or 4 detectives, the Commonwealth attorney, and both the defendants out in front of their house by that time. And I look over the corner of my eye, and the dog is running right straight at us. And I had to make a decision right then and there. I mean, it would be great evidence that the dog attacked one or both of them. But I needed them to cooperate. And so I'm sitting there with my hand behind my back, waving the canine officers off. And you know how they hate that. They've been running for several hundred yards and then to have to just stop without making an apprehension. But I think it was one of the best pieces of information that we got, and we got plenty on this. We instantly identified suspects, and we still didn't allow ourselves to start tunneling our vision toward them. But the more we worked around, John Bryant, one of my detectives, he's right there at the front corner of 1670, their residence. And this is an apartment building that has 2, 4, maybe 6 apartments in it, and they're on the second floor. Well, this is right at the first floor of bush at the corner of the building, and you can see the tire tracks from the pursuit go right up to this bush and then swerve away from it and going back out on Alexandria. Well, guess what? Another Columbia's money bag with blood and money and change in it. So stashed right there in that bush, and the best we could surmise is they did that during the pursuit. So that was pretty good placement to come in from 80, 90 mile an hour and dump a bag. And actually, it was pretty well concealed. We didn't have to dig through the bushes, but you get into the right spot with a flashlight and you could see it. So we recovered that. Meanwhile, we've got the defendants in separate vehicles, and we're taking them down to headquarters for interview. I've assigned John Bryant to write our search warrants for us in the meantime, and that's generally a good 45-minute process, although we're not in any hurry because we've got everything stabilized at this point. So it's not like you're rushing, or sometimes you end up sitting down at the suspect's coffee table and handwriting the search warrant. You're having to get it done that quick. But in this case, we had time to properly do the.
How do you get a warrant signed that late at night? Do you go by district or circuit court, or how you do that?
Well, they've got an on-call system with the district judges, and they serve on-call weekends and nights and such. And so you get to wake the judge up. And once again, my philosophy is let me get past 3:30, please. And then I can be a human.
Are judges on the same timeline? Do they have a spot where they don't like to wake up?
Well, they're not used to working nights, certainly. We don't have night courts, or we certainly didn't at that time.
We could probably do a show with detectives on going to judges' homes. Or I was at A1A bar by the volleyball net with Judge Hayes one time while they were playing volleyball, swearing to a warrant, and we could do a show on that. I remember having to catch Julia Tackett as I went to her house one day. It was in the afternoon on a weekend, and she opens the door, and this little dog she has just takes off and heads down the street. We look at it. She looks at me and she goes, "Well, go get him." So I had to go get the dog, and then I got my warrant. So we could probably do a whole show on what that's like when you go to their house.
That is true. I can remember one coming to this door very slowly at about 3:00 in the morning, and finally he starts creaking the door open and he says, "Sorry, boys, a little beard up."
Appreciate the honesty, though.
I hadn't heard that term before.
Beard up.
Okay. It certainly described what his situation was.
Before the evidence became overwhelming against these two defendants, what was your initial impression of them?
Yeah, what were they like?
You know what I mean?
Very cooperative.
Okay.
Fairly calm.
How old?
They were in their 20s, maybe 30-ish.
And they let you come right on into their house with no issues with that. Interesting.
Because they had made the call to say, our car's been stolen.
Yeah, they've already started.
They've started the narrative.
To which then you had seen the blood spots, which led to a far more intensive investigation of those two defendants.
Definitely.
Very strange. Very strange why they would do that.
So at this point, they just think that you're there to help with the car.
Yes. Well, and that's certainly what we're trying to convey to them.
But in your mind, you had already linked together that Columbia's with these two suspects.
Well, when it's their car and the Chevy where it was crashed It, once again, had another Columbia's money bag in it. And down on the floor, there was a gun over to one side and a knife over on the other side of it. So there was quite a bit going on that we were putting together as we went.
I was trying to reconcile all that evidence. I mean, if the lottery existed, I'd gone and got a lottery ticket. People don't understand that in a lot of murder cases that physical evidence really is just not there. And when you get it, you really are thankful.
Get just a little piece,
Yes,
and
exactly.
you're happy as you can be. And I haven't even gotten to the big part of what we found.
Yeah, because it's like there was a coupon in the paper that night.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like Alexandria is just busting with money bags.
Exactly.
That it is.
How much money?
I don't remember what it was.
Like petty cash kind of thing?
No.
Okay, it's a good amount.
Credit cards weren't that popular back then, so there's a lot.
So
of
everybody
cash.
was paying. And Columbia's was
a Friday night.
Friday night, and it was
popular.
a very upscale type of a restaurant, a steakhouse,
No, it was middle of the road.
middle of the road.
There's still one downtown, I believe.
Yes.
And the one out there on Alexandria was bigger than downtown, but really relatively the same kind of place.
Mm-hmm.
Without interrupting your flow, can we go back to this decedent and what was happening back at the scene? I don't mean to get you too much out of chronology, but I'm a little curious about who that was and what happened at the scene. Because when you're doing these other things, somebody was probably back there at Columbia. Is there what details do you have on that?
Yeah, there's police and fire, and the private security guard was there. And so they're fighting the fire is the main thing that they're doing, but they're also taking a look and seeing if there's any other victims, and they kind of clear the whole interior of the restaurant. By the time that I got back there, the whole place was engulfed and had started to come down. They were starting to get control of it. Like I say, then you start wading through the water and watching the ceiling drop and those kind of things.
Had the victim been burned?
No,
No.
a lot of soot.
So were you able to identify who this victim was
Yes.
at this point, or?
We did. He was the night manager. Stafford Clay Nelson actually was a resident of Richmond, Kentucky, but and long time in the restaurant business. His nickname was Pally, and he was well known, well liked, especially through Richmond, because he had worked a couple of different restaurants there, and everybody knew him, and he was the guy to go to, kind of like a Smitty at Columbia's downtown.
So how were you able to identify Clay? Through ID on his person?
Yes, just a wallet ID right there, so didn't take much to put that together.
And so the nature of his injury was stabbing.
Yes, multiple stab wounds.
How about family? Any idea of any family or anything? Or can you recall that back then?
Yes, his father and mother were both alive then. So I think he had a sister. Judge William Jennings was one of his best friends. As a matter of fact, Judge Jennings, he was a circuit court judge for Clark in Madison County. He came to every day of the trial and sat there with me. And so I got to know him quite well after that. There is, in fact, a liquor store in Richmond called Pally's.
Oh.
It was, in fact, named after him.
Clay Nelson. Wow.
So while the suspects are, I'm guessing at this time, downtown being interviewed,
Yes, they are.
then Clay, I guess, is being picked up by the coroner at that time and
Yeah, it takes a while.
taken. Mhm.
But the fire's getting under control, and it finally gets to where we can go inside and start taking a look around. One of the first things that I observed as I went back into that through the back door was there was a walk-in cooler. And it's interesting that Columbia's at that time anyways, and I guess in COVID days you actually can't do it anymore, but they would put their salad dressings in small individual plastic bowls. And that's how you would get your dressing served to you. So there was this cooler is almost full of salad dressing, whether it was still in the large containers or in plastic bowls that they gathered up that night. And one of the boxes just on the inside, well, first reason why I'm really searching this one is that I see a men's necktie Walk-in coolers generally have a push bar on the inside. In this case, it was a push post that allows someone, after the door closes behind them, to open up the door from inside the cooler. Well, in this case, apparently, Clay Nelson took refuge in that cooler and had taken off his tie, and we got that identified that it was his tie, tied it around that and attempted to tie it and hold it to the shelves inside. So there was obviously a lot of struggle going on, and there was a lot of stuff scattered around the room.
So his attackers couldn't come in the cooler.
Right. He's holding the door closed by simply pulling against it. The shelves weren't sturdy enough to just tie the tie, because that might have kept them from getting in. And in fact, apparently they had it partially open, at least at one time, and there was actually stabs through the tie. But the truly remarkable thing that we learned inside that cooler was we found a cardboard shipping box for salad dressing, and it was sitting there, and you could see that there was a small piece of stiff board, like a paper board. It was folded over several times to make a stylus type of thing, and it was dipped in Thousand Island dressing. And actually, Clay had written out the name Clarence right on top of the box.
Wow.
So he, in effect, testified from the grave by doing that.
Hey, you know there's more to the story, so go download the next episode like the true crime fan that you are.
The Murder Police podcast is hosted by Wendy and David Lyons and was created to honor the lives of crime victims so their names are never forgotten. It is produced, recorded, and edited by David Lyons. The Murder Police podcast can be found on your favorite Apple or Android podcast platform, as well as at murderpolicepodcast.com, which is our website, and it has show notes for imagery and audio and video files related to the cases you're going to hear. We are also on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, LinkedIn, and YouTube, which has closed caption available for those that are hearing impaired. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe for more and give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcast or wherever you download your podcast from. Subscribe to the Murder Police podcast and set your player to automatically download new episodes so you get the new ones as soon as they drop. And please tell your friends. Lock it down, Judy.